evidently love goes well in your life goes well. At least that's one of the things that has a big impact. And yeah, it's it's at the center of them. I mean, just think of all those songs. Love is all you need, love makes the world go round. Right? That stuff, right? And you think, what is this love? What makes the world go round? Oh, so damn important to our lives. And that's partly what we want to answer. And the focus of your investigation, so I'm assuming you're all honors students, you're independent, you want to think for yourselves and so on. So I set you a project which involves looking up two films. Not the recent version of Blade Runner, which I haven't seen, but the original Blade Runner. And the other one was Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. And the reason I set these two films is, first, I've thought a lot about them, so I don't have to go look at them again in order to think my way through them. It's hard to figure out a film, even a fairly straightforward one. So I've thought about those films quite a bit, written about them. And they bring into focus a key aspect of love, not the only one, but a very important one, which emerges when we say things like, I want to be loved for myself. Right? And that's the kind of thing that we typically say, right? You don't want to be loved because, as Yeats puts it, of your yellow hair, because, well, your yellow hair may eventually fall out or turn gray. And you don't want to be loved for your wealth because, well, you could lose it, or that doesn't seem intimate enough, right? I could give it to somebody else. Would you love them then, right? That would be the sort of thought. And yet, just as it's hard to say what love is, it's extremely difficult to say what the self is for which we want to be loved when we say we want to be loved for ourselves. Right? That's a hard question. The two films, each in a different sort of way, help you to think about that question. So if we're just asked to think about it in the abstract, right, let's take out a piece of paper, let's all write down what we have in mind when we think we want to be loved for ourselves, the results are usually pretty disappointing. But if you've got something concrete, or in this case, filmic, to think about, that often helps you to see better what the issues are. And I thought we'd start with a text that I've thought about for a long time, the Gospel of Matthew. And one reason for starting or thinking about the Gospel, there's a handout. If you didn't get one, somebody might give you one. The reason to think about the Gospel of Matthew is, first of all, it's an extremely influential and important text that, for lots of people, it's the Word of God. Well, it would be handy if we had God's Word on these things, because you assume he knows what he's talking about, right? If you remember the famous scene where Pontius Pilate says to Christ, what is truth, said jesting Pilate, right? And he didn't, unfortunately, pause for a reply, which I think is too bad, because it would be really interesting to hear what the Son of God thought truth was, since philosophers have been spending 2,500 years trying to figure out what it is. It'd be really handy to have God's view of it. So whether we are Christians or not, well, it doesn't matter. We're not looking at this as a sacred text that some of you may. I don't mind. You can look at it whatever way you want. But I'm not in particular looking at it that way. I'm just thinking, here's a text that a lot of people take very seriously. And what does it tell you? Well, when Christ is asked, what are the two great commandments? He says, love God with your whole heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Well, so there. What is he asking us to do? Now, right, we think, great, yeah, that sounds good, doesn't it? In fact, the Gospel of John goes even further and says, God is love. Well, I think now we've got a lot of important stuff on the table, right? First, the two great commandments we should love ourselves and love God. It's all about love. And then the other is that maybe God is love, so that we'd actually be finding out about something quite important, right? Even beyond human importance, cosmic importance. And of course, some people think, well, it's what is cosmically unifying. It's not just a human force, but a cosmic force. The great philosopher Empedocles says love is the thing that unites everything. And even Aristotle, who's usually thought to be fairly sober, and whose stuff on friendship we'll be looking at later on, Aristotle too says that the love is the force that moves the universe. Right? It's not just a little, not just us. Oh, whatever about that, it's pretty heady stuff. But what we want when we're thinking about it, we're thinking about that thing we want and that thing we think we do when we are at that fraught moment in our lives where we say, oh, I love you, right? And now we want to know, what are you saying? Right? Oh, it sounds good. Now, what do you think you're saying? Or when someone says it to you and your little heart goes pitter-patter, oh, he loves me, right? Or when you pluck the things off the dandelion, he loves me not. What are you? What do you have in mind at all? Now, human life, as you're all aware, is full of bullshit, right? 99%, as far as I can see, of what you hear approximates to the condition of bullshit. Nearly everything politicians say, right? Do they really think about what they're saying? It takes about 2 seconds. Of course, one of the things they often say is, I love you all, right? You know, there must be something miswired in there, right? We might ourselves be simply picking up on, passing along some counterfeit coin, because our culture tells us, all the magazines are full of it, the newspapers are full of it, pop songs and other songs are full of it, right? And so you kind of get it out of the ozone, the cultural ozone, and then you think it's important, right? You think, oh, this must be a really important thing. So when I make this move in the social game, I make a really important move. But maybe you're just whistling Dixie, right? It's just nothing. It might be ashes. So we don't want to take it for granted that it is important, right? We want to see what it could be that justifies anybody in thinking it is important. Now, we have to be not exactly skeptical, but we have to cast a cold eye on it, right? And not be taken in too readily by the kind of cultural ideology that makes us think this is terribly important. There's a billboard I saw on a disused cinema, one of those old cinema billboards that said, love is another name for the oppression of women. There's a thought to conjure up with, right? Maybe what we're looking at is something that has a bad side. Might not even be just empty, it might be bad. Maybe in, I can't remember who says this, Byron, the English poet, Lord Byron, George Gordon Byron. Love is of man's life a thing apart, 'tis woman's whole existence. Now, my guess is that most of you women, probably aren't inclined to think that. Oh, yes, love is woman's whole existence, and but of men's life a thing apart. Nonetheless, it might be that part of the story about love is that it's a gendered notion, and that what men think they're telling you when they say, I love you, or say to each other that they love each other, isn't what you're saying as a woman when you say, I love you, because, well, look, for the guy, right, that's just Wednesday, it's a weekend kind of thing. At work, he's not thinking about that, but you're supposed to be thinking about it the whole time. So your whole life is just a tiny little fraction of his. That makes a big difference. Even if we are downstream from that view, we're not that far downstream. Byron is not that far away from us. So, you know, we might be picking up still eddies of that stream, even if the stream is back. So that's what we're going to be doing. If you don't want to do that, don't take the class. Right? We're going to be thinking about this. And I think for lots of people, they just don't want to think about it. That's perfectly okay. There are lots of things to think about. And, you know, you might think that prime numbers are more interesting to think about than this, and then you should do that. So that's what we're going to be doing. Any questions, issues, thoughts about it? You all comfortable? Okay. So, you know, what Monty Python Flying Circus calls the naughty bits, right, are genitals and private parts and the parts of our body that we think of as intimate or whatever. We do have to talk about those a little bit because, well, you know, when you make love, those are involved, typically. And so if you're uncomfortable about that, then you might be. There's nothing wrong with that, especially. You know, it's just different people have different attitudes to these things. And, you know, I don't want to make anybody feel like, gee, you know, we go in there and have to talk about that. You know, I don't want that. So, you know, if you feel like this would make me uncomfortable, we're not going to be too much of it. We're not going to get too lewd or anything. But nonetheless, lewdness, pornography, sexuality, sexual deviance, sexual practices, these are all lumped into this. And that's in fact itself a fascinating question as to how it is. So this is what Yeats says, right? Love has pitched his mansion in the place of excrement. Right? Right? So we've got to think about the place of excrement a little bit, because that evidently is where Love's mansion is pitched. And we might think, you know, when Christ says, love your neighbor as yourself and love God, it doesn't sound like he's thinking that thought, right? But that's an interesting question, right? So what thought is he? Is love and sexuality intimately tied? So Freud, for example, thinks that every kind of love, the love you have for your parents, your brothers, your friends, your children, and your lover, of course, are all sexual. They're just differently sexual. He doesn't think that none of them are. So he thinks all love is sexual. Is he right? Is he wrong? How would we decide that question? Should we talk about it and come to a conclusion that way, or do we need to do experiments? What do we do exactly to answer the question? And philosophical questions are typically questions like that. Questions where you're not even sure how you would go about answering. So if I ask you to figure out, right, how much money you've got in your pocket, that's not rocket science. You know exactly how you should go about doing it. Not like this, right? 4 seems like a good number, right? You count it. And then the same for all kinds of other things. We have a very good idea of how to answer them. Nobody thinks that we should be trying to calculate the gravitational constant or the speed of sound or the speed of light by sitting here and writing numbers arbitrarily on a piece of paper and trying to figure out which of them looks good. Right? We should instead go do experiments and so on. But when it comes to issues like what love is, a huge question, which we'll see Plato raise in the Symposium, is who can you trust to tell you the truth about love? Who knows? Who are the experts? Well, there are plenty of, as the French say, soi-disant experts, self-styled experts. The world is full of them. There are gazillions of them, to pick a number. Right? Lots who purport to. There are psychiatrists and psychologists and sexologists and people writing for journals and magazines and newspapers and television people making. Who knows? We're kind of at a loss, right? Should you ask your parents? Do they know? What about your priest? Does he or she know? What about your doctor? Should you ask? Well, some of these questions you should ask your doctor about, right? Will I get pregnant if I do such and such? that seems like a medical question, right? Is it risky? Are there health risks attached to doing such and such? We know where to answer those questions, and those too are part of the environment of love, right? So you might think it divides up into a whole lot of different questions. What about a political question? Do you think what is love could be a political question? And the thought might be, oh, how could it be it's a personal question. Is it personal? It's not about politics, is it? But maybe certain forms of certain cultural or political formations are inimical to love. They actually go against them. Right? There are lots of really good films about this. There's a terrific one which is called, what it was called? Remember that? It's the something of strangers. It's set in East Berlin.
The lives of others?
The lives of others. Thank you. The lives of others.
The what?
Right. The lives of others.
The Lives of Others?
Yeah.
Yeah, have you seen that? Yeah, so that's a film that says, if there's no notion of a private sphere, if anybody could be listening in all the time, then the notion of an intimate sphere and one in which love can develop might itself be under attack. And of course, one might think, as many communists did think, that love is a bourgeois illusion. That might fit in with the thought that actually not just a good thing, not something we all should want and have, but actually a form of oppression, a bad thing, something that's going to deceive us. So we should keep our minds open. The form of the class that I had in mind, when I thought we were all going to sit around a nice big table, which is what I asked for, but didn't get, was that we would all have essentially a series of symposia, right? Like dinner parties without the dinner, right? We'd sit around and talk. So we're going to try to approximate to that. I don't want to, I can talk from now, as anyone who's ever taken a class from me will tell you, I can start and finish 10 weeks later without drawing breath. So, don't worry, there won't be silence. I'm perfectly capable of filling it all up with pretty interesting stuff. But I really do want us to be able to talk to each other. That's mostly up to you. If you come eager and ready and you want to talk, that's great. If you can't stand the sound of each other's voice, but mine is so mellifluous that you just want to hear all of it, we can do that too. I just want it to be, something that we're all happy with. So, I'm a very sweet person, really. So, you don't have to be afraid of me or anything. You can just tell me what you think about things. And even tell me that, I don't like the way the class is going, but we do it a different way. I might not listen to you, as I've been doing this a long time, so I'm pretty good at it. But I don't want you to feel like, you can't. So nothing bad will happen. You all comfortable about that? Yeah? Okay. And on the writing assignment, I'm going to give you some advice. I'm not a endless checker of everybody's temperature. So you've got to take responsibility for those. If you don't start working on the paper pretty quickly, looking at the films, thinking about them, and then seeing how things that you're reading, there won't be a huge amount of reading. I don't believe in stuffing people with things. You need to have these sort of meaty materials, a small amount of them. You need to think about them and digest them. But if you don't have the films already in mind, you haven't seen them once, right? You're not sure what resonates, right? Where as soon as you do, you start thinking, oh, that relates to this. I should ask a question about that, or that was something I wanted to discuss. Then you can use the seminar to help you write the paper, right? By already having it in mind. If you wait till the last minute, you won't do a good job. And that will be disappointing for me and for you, so we don't want that. Yeah?
Have you posted the syllabus or given it? Because I don't think that...
It's on, the syllabus is on Sakai.
Okay. Is it under the resources tab?
I think it's under the thing called syllabus.
Okay.
I mean,
I checked this morning, it wasn't
It-
posted, I don't.
Yeah, it was posted.
I promise you, I posted it. I'll check to make sure. I don't, no, Brent, didn't I email it to you too? No. I did. There's something wrong with the Sakai email. I've had this.
We got a notification with this paper on it.
What?
We got like a.
You did get this, so I
Yeah,
posted
yeah, it
this.
is.
And it's under the, okay, I'll check it and make sure. I'm a little absent-minded, so I might have thought to myself that I was doing it, but not done. But I'll check and make sure that it's on there. So you didn't, I didn't send an email to everyone who was registered before I posted the syllabus, giving you the reading for the first week. But everyone did get that, okay. All right, so I will check on the syllabus to make sure that it's there and that you know what you're reading. I think that I asked you to read part of Love's Confusions for today, and that's sort of going to be the background text, so we're going to read a little bit of it each week. As you can see, it's a pretty short book. So the amount of reading is not much, but there's quite a lot of thought in it, so you might want to, Okay, so let's start talking about the two great commandments as a way of getting ourselves into. And what I gave you was just, this is not, we're not going to spend time on the handout. I just wanted you to see that, right, one of the issues that comes up is not what is love, but what is the gospel talking about when it talks about love? And of course, it wasn't written in English, so we have to do some research and seeing what it is. And all I've oh wait a minute, I think I gave you the wrong handout. This is the one on the Beatitudes. Well, that's kind of handy too. But it's not the one I meant to give you, so I have to give you another one. Wednesday. Don't worry about it. We can pretend that it never happened and it will just go away. But I will give it to you on Wednesday. It's just got the stuff like this about what is the term. The Greek term is Greek verb agapao, which, or agapan in the infinitive. The gospel says, agapeses ton klesion suo hoseote. Love your, and that's the agapao verb. And it's one of a series of Greek verbs that we often translate as love. And in fact, though that might seem like who gives a damn what Greek verbs there are, that turns out to be kind of interesting, right? because two of the verbs, eran, give us eros and erotic love, and the other one, philein, gives us philosophy and philanthropy, and the eran one sounds naughty bit directed, right? And the philein part sounds more, how would we put it, ethereal, right? So up versus down, right? We're not thinking when we do philosophy that we're engaging our genitalia. We think we're engaging our minds, right? And so in philanthropy and philosophy and philology and all those other phil words, we might think we're closer to another notion. And that's also the one from which we got philos, friend. So we might think, oh, look, already in the language we've got some nice ways of dividing the whole thing up. There is friendship, and there's erotic love, and there's sort of familial love, which is on the friendship end, and there's the erotic stuff. You were busy hiving things off and dividing them all up, and then we think, good, so divide and conquer is always a good strategy. If we do that, maybe we're making some headway. And agapan, as noticed, not either of those other two. So people have thought, there is agapic love, which is what you find talked about by Christian theologians. And agapic love is the kind of love that the gospel is talking about, the kind we should have for God, which is quite different from these other things, and the kind that we should have for ourselves too. Now, the problem, if you start thinking about it then, is the kind of love that I have for myself when I think about self-love. if that's my guide to what the verb means, then that's going to lead me far away from, at least in any straightforward sense, the notion of, well, maybe either friendship or erotic love. It's true that Oscar Wilde says to fall in love with yourself is the beginning of a lifelong romance, which is a nice thought. And it's true that Woody Allen says, right, what's wrong with masturbation? It's making love to someone that you, or it's sex with someone you love, right? You know, it's hardly like the first thought you have when you think about self-love is not masturbatory, right? You could think that, but self-love doesn't seem to be sexual in that way, right? And now we've got a guide into a third kind of love, agapic love, which is the kind that if we were following out in the gospel, we'd have to explore. Here's the bottom line of the many explorations that have been attempted of it. First in Greek, in ancient Greek, where it occurs, Plato uses it and Aristotle does, interchangeably with those other two. There's no particular semantic field right now. That's exclusively the agapic kind. So it's not as if when we do research in either the classical Greek lexicons or the ones of Koine Greek that the Gospels are written in, we don't get any real information that can help us. Unfortunately, we're left, and this is the bottom line, I think, of research. It's whatever you want it to be. It's whatever makes the most sense of the commandments. There's no independent source of information that says, oh, that's what it is. That's what we're being encouraged to say. It could just as easily have used either of the other two verbs, you might think, and would still be trying to figure out what it is. Okay. So let's look at the two commandments and see what questions we can raise about them and what you think about them. So first, they're imperatives. They're commandments. Love, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself, and thou shalt love God with your whole heart, soul, and mind. So let's think about some of the problems that arise from the commandments, and tell me what you've read some stuff about it, so maybe you have some thoughts about it. Yeah.
At least to me, it seems like the separation that's made a lot of times in the Christian tradition between erotic love... Between, sorry, I'm like a really talker. Between like erotic love and like this kind of philosophic higher-minded love, like kind of kill, like make something forbidden, makes like the passion forbidden, and that seems to like kind of like exile any mysticism that I think is kind of necessary for it. Like, I don't know, like Sufis in Islam, for example, like give themselves over to God, and there is an erotic element to that, like commensurate with the body. Yeah. So it seems like if you're committed to do this, at least inside of the Christian tradition that like I was exposed to growing up, and I think it's kind of prevalent in the U.S. Like practicing that itself requires this so-called like polluted element that's like requires the like polluted element that's like the naughty bits, and like if you don't include that, like maybe taken out of the purely sexual like reproductive context.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, so looking at agapese, so love thy neighbor as yourself, your thought is if you make that too much like the allegedly asexual philein, that kind of love, whatever philos is, right, and you take away the eros, then you seem to be missing something in the mix, right? Yeah. In part, it seems to make it too intellectual, too ethereal. So we don't want it to become simply a matter of a bunch of beliefs that you have, but rather it seems to require more passion than that. Yeah.
I'm no art historian, but I just, it came to mind the Pietà, which I think is almost an erotic depiction of Mary and Christ, and there is, I don't remember specifically, but a body of work that's quite erotically tinged, and it is Christian.
There was a famous art historian whose name I can't remember. He's so famous, though, it'll come to me eventually, who's done studies of paintings of the body of the dead Christ, showing typically at the center, an erection under the loincloth. Because after all, Christ is a man. And so as another way you could work your way towards this thought is the sexuality of Christ matters, because if there's none, he's not a man. And after all, a big part of the doctrine is that the Word was made flesh, right? And the thought about being made flesh is, Christ is somebody who, like us, has sexual thoughts, a sexuality, genitals, right? All those things. And if you take them away, you start to lose some of the central idea that it matters that God, in the Christian story, that God became a human being in order, so to speak, to see what life was like from our point of view. We'll see in a little bit, but that's a very important part of the thought about the loving part. So both of those two would be, you're quite right. There's something, you see it, and especially too in the Pietas, one where it's the dead Christ that Mary is looking at. But if we look at the multitude of depictions of virgin and child, of Christ as a little, the other one, as we often see, his little pee-pee, as my children call it, right? His little pee-pee is right figured, and there's that look between the mother and the Christ child, which itself becomes one of the ways that we talk about love, is the look of love, the way love looks at you and the way you look at it. And those are very important ideas too. So the mother's love for a child is not just the beginning of philos, it's also the beginning of eros, where the child learns how to love in all these kinds of ways, first from its interaction with its mother and mother's body and so on. So that's another dimension, which might make us not want to etherealize, or as we'd say, clean up too much, whatever it is the gospel is encouraging us to do. Yeah.
You quoted Kierkegaard,
Yeah.
separating love and friendship, like erotic love
Yeah.
and friendship, as both sort of less will-oriented,
Yeah.
more like they happen to a person.
Yeah.
And then agapic love is
Yeah.
sort of the exception to that.
Yeah.
Couldn't it seem more like friendship plays the role in the middle, where there is an element of choice, but also an element of passion? I suppose, like, where I'm going is that we started this with sort of making this, noticing the separation between this agapic love and these other more like dirty or passionate or like animalistic forms. But I feel like friendship probably, there is this element of like desire or like appeal, but also this sort of more spiritual component.
Yeah, that's a nice thought. I mean, one would be that we separate out these elements, or poles, right? We pole one sort of roughly towards genital sex and the other towards the love of wisdom. Those seem to be very far apart. But when we look at friendship, there does seem to be, and the way you put it was an element of choice. That's what's crucial to the Kierkegaardian stuff, is that after the reason, why, can you just be, as a little segue, can you tell me why the will becomes so important? Why does it matter that the love can be something that we can do at will?
I think it maybe then becomes something that we can say about ourselves.
So the thought is, it comes from you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, so that would mean that you were the thing that did the willing. And of course, that would be interesting when you ask that you want to be loved for yourself. Is that what you want to be loved for? What you can think about that. But there's another more obvious connection. Yeah.
When the will becomes involved, then ethics becomes involved.
Ethics becomes involved. That's right. It's like, because if you can't help it, right? Ought implies can, at least it seems to, right? That's a thought. If it's not under your control, how can you be blamed for it? And how is that? There was another. Yeah, you're right on the cusp of yet another one, right?
Is it that that's kind of like a prerequisite to agape love? Is that you're able to, will?
Say again. What was the first part?
It's kind of like required of agape love that you like are able to will it.
Why?
What's that?
Why is it? Yes, I agree.
When you say like love your neighbor, it's like a pretty much everybody around you, right? As opposed to like the first two where it is, again, less, you're able to just will it.
So you're all pussyfooting around the key thing, but you're close, yeah?
I think in the text it said it meant you could fake it. It meant you could fake it.
So, if you can will it.
If you can will it.
Yeah, that's taking us in a different but very important direction. Yeah, which is the so the things we can control have lots of good features, all coming from the fact that we can control them. But the things we can't control have lots of good features, all coming from the fact that we can't control them too. So, for example, think of discovering how to make somebody laugh. Right? So when you discover what people laugh at, you're not discovering something about their will, right? Because after all, what they find funny is something they can't resist laughing at, right, so to speak. It just cracks them up. And there are a whole lot of other things that are like that too. Now, one more, back to the key question. Why is the will important? So we've got some thoughts about it, but there's a further thought.
Well, is it because like someone else can't like force you to love someone, or like?
So if it's up to you, then, and of course that might be the thought is that with these other kinds of love, right, they seem to just come upon us, right? And sometimes we feel helpless in the face of them. Either we can't help falling in love with somebody. I think there might even be an Elvis Presley song that sounds like that. Right, and or that we can't help falling out of it either. And that can be a terrible thing. But there's a further crucial. Thou shalt explain. Yeah.
So it's an imperative.
Yeah.
Thou shalt like love thy neighbor
Yeah.
as thyself.
Yeah.
So if you don't have a will, you can't fulfill an imperative,
Yeah.
and like you can't reap the rewards of entering the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think the crucial thought is the imperative makes it under your control. It has to, because you can't be ordered to do something intelligibly that it's not in your capacity to do. So if God were saying, now listen, I require you to have this feeling for your neighbors that it's not under your control to have, you would think, and how am I supposed to fill that requirement? Right? So the will and the nature of the very fact that you're commanded requires that the kind of thing you're being commanded to do is the sort of thing that you have some control over. Okay, now let's flip back. So one kind of love, we think, seems to have to a very minimal degree under our control. At least this is part of the ideology of it. We fall into love, we fall in love, we fall out of love. Right? And these sound like not aspects of our will, but really things that are not part of our will at all. And now you wisely said, well, let's divide. Let's take a little bit of both, right? Friendship seems to have two elements. On the one hand, it's a bit like erotic love. There are people you just can't like enough to be friends with. But it's not so much under the power of that you don't. There isn't still it's a little weaker, a little less consuming, and to that extent you can think, yeah, we're really close friends. I really like her, right, or him, right? Without sort of feeling like I don't have any control in the matter, right? You think, no, you really do enter into friendships. There's a lot of voluntary stuff in it, right? It's not like you fall into the friendship. You could, but right? You can actually cultivate it, develop it. So that might be right. Maybe there's a little bit of both. So to the degree that there's any of the involuntary stuff, the stuff that's not under the control of your will, notice that it'll still raise a problem for the commandments, right? Because now if what I'm being asked to do is something that, right, I may or may not be able to do depending, then again the commandment falls. So you can see Kierkegaard, right, pushing in that direction, right? He thinks, oh, in order to make sense of the commandments, there must be a kind of love that is not like the kind I fall into, but the kind that I can freely give. Now, So let's hold that thought. Let's hold the thought of where Kierkegaard ends up. And now let's flip back to the, yeah, go ahead.
I think you can make an argument that like falling in love is a choice in a sense because
Is what?
It's a choice also because I think it's kind of like a preparation in a sense because when you see someone you fall in love with them, there's like certain aspects or characteristics that you say that appeal to you, and you made the decision that those aspects appeal to you.
Yeah.
So that in a way is a choice because it's up until that moment you made different decisions of what appeals to you. You wouldn't have fallen in love with that person.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm inclined to disagree with you, but I'd rather hear one. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, well, so what, were you going to respond to that?
Well, yeah, I think I think there's truth to that, but also that like the case may be like that comes from the fact that these three forms of love, or at least two of them, are kind of bound to each other and can't be completely separated all the time. Like you might be friends with someone and in love with them as well, you know.
It's certainly true. So you might think, well, so I sort of thought the picture was, well, in friendship, there's a little bit of the passion that there is in erotic love, but not quite as much. So there is more room for the will. And I thought the objection was, no, actually, in erotic love, there's room for will too, but on a different ground. And that different ground, if I got it right, was this. You're in erotic love, you're responding to aspects of the person, and you've chosen which ones those are valuable. Yeah, and so can we talk about that for a second? It sounds like an interesting idea. Go ahead, yeah.
I would disagree with that just because I feel like you don't necessarily decide aspects. Like, some men are born and then grow up and then fall in love with women who resemble their mothers. I wouldn't say that they, like, chose to be attracted to their mother.
Yeah.
It's like, just because you feel some type of way, I don't think means that you decided to feel.
Well, I think there's another, you're very close to the objection that occurred to me, which is like the one that you raised, but is slightly different. So I wonder if, go ahead, you tell me.
I feel like even if somebody has all of the qualities, personality-wise, that you may like, whether or not you chose to like these qualities or not, in erotic love, there's a sense of attraction, and I think you could have every single reason to be attracted to somebody, but you don't get a choice in whether that sort of erotic attraction is there or not.
So the thought might be, here's someone who matches my requirements, so to speak. They've got all the features, but man, there's just no spark, right? And then there's Frank, right? Who has none of the features, but man, is he hot, right? That seems to be another phenomenon, which is that our erotic attractions can be very problematic for the rest of our values. And also, but they're, go ahead.
I just wanted to give a word to biology, which I think is a sort of determinism that plays a almost impossible to overstate role in our desires and attraction to other people.
Well, leaving aside the overstate part, there are certainly facts, and so one area I thought we don't often think about when we're thinking about love stories and about I love you and stuff, is that there's a huge background of genetics and biology and primatology and a whole lot of other things that look at us just as they look at other animals and say, yeah, you've got your courtship rituals, the bonobos have theirs, and parrots have another one, and there's an awful lot of biology going on in there, and you just don't know what it is. You don't know why you're attracted, but the people who do evolutionary biology can tell you, at least they purport to be able to. They say, I'll tell you why, right? But I was going to say, I thought there was another, maybe you're going to tell me what it is. There seems to be another obvious fact.
I don't know if I could try.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's not that you have to reach for the one that I'm going for, I'm just curious.
I'm going to take the ultimate point is that biology is overstated.
Yeah.
Especially when you're talking about features, is like and this goes off what you said about, and if I'm talking too quietly, please tell me. that goes off like what you said about like our erotic desires being problematic for things. Is the point is like someone like when you see someone you can see them as like an amalgamation of various features, like either in, like I don't know, a nose or a mouth or like certain aspects of them, and what makes the problematic thing so attractive is transgression. And like the transgressive aspect is like it's like a fetish that's grounded in erotic, and it's not biological in the sense because this is so coded by the outside that it's not like that we have this drive to have this feature. It's that this feature is the grounds for something that we can attach.
Well, I think that let me pick one sort of central thing with them. I think it is extremely important, which is that we have to be able to make sense of what you rightly call sort of fetishizing something, and that can be something that can be very strange. It can be very strange that that's the attractor, that's the thing that is actually crucial to whether or not you find another person sexually attractive or not. Maybe something quite outre. But I thought there was a different one that was sort of more obvious, which is you don't choose, or it seems you don't, your sexual orientation. And so, for example, you gave a heterosexual example, right? But it might be that you thought, and you gave one too, you said, oh, well, you know, maybe you want to marry you're attracted to a woman who is like your mother. But the fact that you're attracted to a woman, or a man, or both, or neither, all of these are open possibilities, and yet they seem to be, and they're not under control of your will, and yet they seem to themselves be major selectors of features. So, you know, if, like Loudon Wainwright's son, you're Rufus, there's a song of Loudon Wainwright which is, Rufus is a tit man. When he was a little kid, he loves the breast, right? And so, you know, so the thought would be, yeah, but if you're into other men, you're not going to be a tit man. And so the thought is the larger background of your orientation is going to also select features. I think a different way to think about this too, if we did just have a little kind of side note on biology, is one of the things we know from evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology is the attractors have to do with genetic fitness. They're all, you know, so you find something attractive for reasons that can be tracked back to genetic fitness. We are not ourselves typically selecting on genetic fitness, but many of the things we do find attractive, like symmetry of features, or the width of a pelvis in relation to the shoulders. There are a whole set of these things. So if you just show people transculturally pictures of female bodies especially, just schematic pictures, you see what's found attractive. It turns out to be a tracker of genetic fitness. So one of them is that asymmetries are a sign of genetic problems. Symmetries are a sign of genetic fitness. So there are all kinds of weirdo stuff. When women are ovulating, they're far more likely to have adventurous sex with somebody that they're not married to, for example. So if you look at the rates of illegitimate children in America who believe that their father, their social father, is their biological father and are wrong, something we can track because now we can do the genetics, right? It's surprisingly high. So, right, there's quite a lot of, so we said, infidelity. And now there is a question of why does that happen? When does it happen? Right? And evolutionary psychologists and biologists have explanations for us, but they all have to do with biological fitness. Right? And that raises a really interesting question, because that sort of says, look, you may think, you think you're telling this story. Oh, I like Mary because she shares my interest in classical music, and God, I just think her eyes are beautiful, and right, you tell a whole big load of stuff like this, and background your genes are saying, yeah, and she'll produce really healthy offspring too, which is the really important thing, right? And you might not even be planning to reproduce, but that's still what the engine, and that's worrisome, because it sort of can make it seem like, gee, we're just instruments by which our genes get into the next generation, which of course is a view that some people, I don't think it's true, but it's at least a story. right, which is weird, it's just the way our genes have of propagating, and our story, the stories we tell ourselves, are just stories, right? They're not the real deal. The real deal is genetics. So that's another thing we'd have to take, and you'll see that Plato has a line that's like this too, is he's not, of course, thinking about genetic fitness and genetics, he doesn't know anything about them, but he's got a comparable story, that the factors that attract us are not what our attraction is tracking. That's tracking of a different, an underlying feature. Okay? These are all great. So now look, see, can we all recollect what we've got? So I have to put the story so far together, right? So we have the commandments seem to require a kind of love that's under our control. We are concerned that that might be too ethereal. We add a passionate dimension. We seem to lose control. That doesn't seem to do the trick. We're led to ask questions about control, right? Notice we then started focusing in on, well, what are we under? What is under our control? Is it always like this, even in erotic love? Do we have some control? Can we flip over to the other commandment for a second? So we're to love our neighbor as ourselves. And so tell me a little, can you riff a little bit on that part of that commandment? Because it's the same notion, right? The love I have for myself is the love that I'm supposed to extend. And
I think the first question you have to ask is like, how do you love yourself in the first place? I think like a lot of people like struggle with that.
I'm sure the thought might be, that's a risky commandment because actually you might hate yourself and you think,
right,
okay, I can love other people the way I love myself. Yeah.
No,
right? That doesn't sound like what the commandment is after, right? But you
right,
have a real
lot
point.
of people struggle with depression and like mental illness, stuff like that too. And like, how can you like love others when you still haven't?
We're often, psychologists and self-help people often tell us this, you can't love another person unless you love yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not claiming it's true, but the thought might be, presupposing self-love, what could it be so that, as it were, Christ is so certain that it's there, and there in a way that if you extended it to others, it would be a really good thing. If you if you understand self-love in certain ways, that sounds like a very risky strategy, right? Yeah.
You want to go ahead? Okay.
Yeah.
I think there's room to understand self-love, maybe on like a biological or a material level, where like any organism is sort of like on like a really material basis self-oriented. All of its processes probably are either like about itself directly or about something else in terms of itself. But in that sense, it seems like self-love is determined or less willful. And it's an interesting command because it sort of combines those two things.
Yeah, so I hadn't thought of that, but that's an interesting thought is that on the one hand you presuppose that the self-love is sort of not up to you because you want to hold it fixed, but that the other one, which is exactly the same, that you're saying is up to you. That would be I hadn't thought of that. That's a really nice further pressure in the commandment, right, that it seems to pull in two different directions. If I make my self-love too under the control of my will, I can't presuppose that it will be there. Right? I'm free not to love myself, so maybe I don't, right? And that's a very nice way to put it. The biology part, I think that's often thought this, so look, self-preservation and preservation of the species seem to be these two major forces that are present in all animals. And if we could take that for granted, then self-preservation would be the sort of thought of, it's the kind of love that goes along with, as we'd say, self-interest, right? It's wanting to survive and do well. It's not the kind of, do you like the kind of person you are? No, but if you try to kill me, I'm sure as hell going to protect myself, right? I mean, that's what dirt, right? It seems like there are two dimensions there,
Yeah.
right? Even the person who might self-hate might still, when you start choking them to death, have a reaction, right? Or want to defend their children or anything. Yeah.
I think I would probably push back on the idea that, organisms have a sense of, they definitely have a sense of self-preservation, but maybe not a sense of preservation of the species.
Yeah.
Like dragonflies or something would propagate, but not with the idea that they need to maintain the dragonfly race.
Yeah.
And with that in mind, it seems then that this commandment would have two parts, where the part about self-love is not, under your agency, and the part about loving others is more like the real commandment, which is like more of a communitarian sort of ideal.
Yeah, though I'd hesitate to split them too much, in part because very same notion, right, as I thought is, the love you have for yourself you should extend. And I think the thought is, I can only extend it if it's under my control. If it is under my control, there would have to be a further explanation for why. Even though it is under my control, I always find myself having it for myself. Yep.
I just think about whenever I hear the first commandment, I always think about the second, I guess just from like the way I was raised and everything. It's more of a delineation between how you love your fellow man versus how you were supposed to love God.
Yeah.
So it's like you're supposed to love God with all your mind, body, and soul, so everything you could possibly give.
Yeah.
Whereas you can love your fellow man as much as you can give yourself, which may not be everything, but what you can afford, but God gets everything.
Yeah, that's a nice way to put it too. I mean, so we haven't looked yet at the first commandment, which has a lot of interesting elements to it in addition. But the thought might be, well, it's stronger than the second. You have to do more when it comes to God than for your fellow man. You're not expected to do more for your fellow man than you do for yourself. And now the thought is, okay, so what am I expected to do for myself? And to some degree, we're back sort of thinking, what is that lesser maybe, but still pretty demanding. So most people, it seems to me, have they do respond, and you'll see, I asked you to read a little bit of Aristotle on those, and we'll be returning to this, the last part of the class, to see Aristotle think about his way about this. But one thought is that somehow or other, self-love is kind of easy. We just do find it easy to put ourselves first, to take our own interests first, to take care of our own well-being. Maybe not everyone, but the ones who aren't broken or whatever, kind of like this. And that's what we're being asked to do. And then the thought was, gee, that's awfully demanding because, I really have quite a bit of self-love. And it's much easier for me to buy a new car for myself than it is to think of, maybe I should get one for my neighbor while I'm at it, right? Or this, it seems like you can just hate your neighbors really pretty easily in a way that it's not quite so easy to hate yourself. Yeah. So that's, I think, we're still kind of got that little bone of worry. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
I think that it's much easier for us to love ourselves because we're obviously with ourselves constantly. And so
you might think that would be the thing that made us hate ourselves the most. Damn, Mary, I see her only on Fridays. It's great for myself. Wherever I go, there I am. That's I can't get rid of it. Right.
Well,
Yeah,
so
no, God, I agree.
We see all of our good traits along with our bad traits, and I think most people are generally okay with themselves, even in the face of depression or mental illness. I think that's almost a sort of a separate disease that isn't really reflective upon how one views themselves. It's more something they're burdened with. But so, because we know our every thought, we know all of the good things we did, or our positive traits, or times we were just tolerable, it's far easier for us to like ourselves than to like someone we don't really know who has done a few things that irritate us. So I think to love someone as yourself, you have to really actively search for all of their qualities, and while you may not ever want to see them again, to sort of really look inside yourself to be like, okay, overall they're all right.
So, so can I just parse out, just so we see the two dimensions of the answer that you gave, or the thought you had. So one is that first, that our self-love is an evaluative reaction to our features, which we're in a better position to know than we are to know other people's those features. And it does seem to me that actually one of the things we do say to someone who says, I love you, you say, you don't even know me, right? And that's a thought. So now, of course, there's a thought that is that, you know, we can be awfully opaque to ourselves. We can, for example, self-deception plays a role. But let's take it, let's not go into the depths there, just let's stick with the thought that, well, my love for myself is an evaluative response to my features. And I think the thought would be, notice that it would be very difficult to extend that to other animals, to small children, because we often think that they exhibit massive self-love, even selfishness, but it's not because they think, I know all my features and look how good they are, right? They're not at that thought yet. And of course, animals who stick up for themselves, don't take it easy when you try to attack them, aren't thinking, what a good little rabbit I am, right? They're not responding that way. So if we go in that direction, right, we're going to lose some of the, you might be quite right, but we'll lose some of the connection to the extension into the biological as an explanation for it, right? Because the thought you have is there's no biological basis for that. That's not what we find when we talk about survival and survival of the species. But it's something much richer than that. So that might be you know, again, a way of just partitioning it up to see what direction we're going. If we do go in that direction, I think we face again a problem. And as you were forming the thought, you're at the same time forming a line of objection against it, which very often happens when we're thinking. When you were thinking, but not the pathological cases, though. Not the cases of depression, where you said, yeah, but even in depression. And then I think what you were hesitating about was really back to the initial thought, which is, we don't all love ourselves when we look at our features. We are often massively self-critical, eager to change a whole lot of our features, not just enraptured with ourselves, right? And again, the thought is going to be, is that what we want to extend to our neighbor? So then it would go like this, right? Well, the Smiths are wonderful. I love them. I have no trouble loving them. I mean, they're Democrats, right? The Joneses are Republicans. Well, you know how it goes, right? I'm just picking these out here because these sort of be very strong selectors for the friendships that people form these days and who they want their children to marry and so on, far more than used to be true in the past. But anyway, the Joneses are Republicans. I've been trying to love them, man, but they're Republicans, right? I can't love them. And that sounds like, again, not the result that the commandment wants. What the commandment says, no, it doesn't matter whether they're Republican. It doesn't matter if they're odious. It doesn't matter what their features are. You've got to love your neighbor anyway. And then you think, oh, that's awfully hard. Yeah, were you going to?
Yeah, I was just going to push back on like the notion of the self that we're working with.
I think we're just exploring.
Yeah.
Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking